Hello, Seiiti Arata. Having negative thoughts is not always a bad thing. At times, negative thinking can help you to be more careful in potentially dangerous situations. For this reason, negative thinking can actually help you to avoid bigger problems. The problem with negative thinking comes when it starts to affect your reality, and your reality is affected by objective and subjective changes. If you want to change your reality, there are basically two options: objective change and subjective change. To change objectively, you need to modify the observable situations in your life. And to change subjectively, you should change how you interpret the situations that you find yourself in. Some of the common examples of objective changes are having the perfect body, having more money in your bank account, being in a relationship, having a nicer house, a new car, a new phone. So objective change is strongly related to having something. And it is something that can be measured and verified by other people, by other independent observers. But do you know what is the classic problem of achieving your happiness through objective change? It's that happiness is hardly ever permanent when we're focused on having, because as soon as we have the desired object, the desire disappears. This is a paradox that has been observed since the times of Plato. We put a lot of effort into achieving the desired point, and when we do so, it seems that we quickly become accustomed to the new state of affairs and we quickly start to desire other changes. On the other hand, subjective change is a strategy that is often easier to implement, and it can bring you more lasting happiness. And instead of seeking changes in the observable reality, in the objective reality, you just devote yourself into interpreting reality differently. And this is subjective because it depends on the way you see the situation. You become the subject in the construction of reality. Therefore, this kind of happiness is found in being, not in having. We can change our mindset so we can deal with negative thoughts in a more constructive way. When you change this perspective, this mindset, you change your reality. Many studies have proven that subjective change has a measurable impact on our reality. This can even cause objective changes. For example, Harvard University has conducted an experiment to test the effects that a changing mindset had on the health of cleaners that worked in hotels in the United States. And these cleaners do a lot of physical activity while they're cleaning the hotel rooms. But when they were asked by the researchers whether they considered themselves to be physically active people or not, most of the cleaners said no. Many of them scored themselves a 0 on a scale from 0 to 10 in terms of physical activity that they do daily. The researchers then decided to work towards changing the mentality of these people. They were showing the cleaners how, in fact, they were much more physically active than the average population, that the work they did was equivalent to spending many hours in the gym. And just 4 weeks after changing the mentality of how they saw their own work, these cleaners, they lost weight, their blood pressure improved, they had better percentage of body fat, everything has changed. They changed the mentality of how they were doing their work and they began to see their day-to-day as a series of exercises. And this brought practical results to their health. The subjective change caused an objective change. Negative thoughts can cause bad practical results. And just like an optimistic mindset can lead to an improvement in health, negative thoughts can increase the amount of problems and difficulties that we experience. This does not mean that having 1 or 2 negative thoughts will be ruining your life. No. It is not necessary that you be trying to control all your negative thoughts and emotions. It is normal. It is okay for you to have negative thoughts from time to time. We all have them depending on the situation. The problem is when these negative thoughts become dominant and they bring, therefore, bad practical results to your life. When we speak about positive or negative mentality, also known as a mindset or a mental model, we're mainly interested in the recurrent thoughts in which we identify ourselves. Ideas that are part of our belief system, our personal values, our own identity. Is your standard mental model positive or negative? There is a whole set of values and conventions and behaviors that we choose for our interpretation of reality and for our decision making. Let's call it all the standard mental model. If your standard mental model is positive, you tend to interpret reality in a more optimistic, confident, and cheerful way. If your standard mental model is negative, your tendency is for you to interpret the same reality in a pessimistic, gloomy, downbeat way. Understanding this difference is fundamental. The facts are the same. What changes is the way you interpret the facts and how you act upon them. The way you interpret situations is determined by your outlook on life. And some thoughts simply appear in our heads and they just go away without causing any impact or any influence in our choices or actions. On the other hand, there are certain ideas, recurring thoughts that end up influencing us directly or indirectly. These are the thoughts we want to observe, and we want to have awareness and wisdom to understand how they are influencing our decisions, our feelings, our behaviors. In addition to raising our level of awareness, we also want to acquire cognitive agility. We want to be clear about what kind of mentality we are using in a particular context, so then we can make the necessary changes. For example, let's imagine that I am in danger. In this situation, it is important for me to be cautious and alert to identify the signs that might require me to run away or to fight and defend myself, fight or flight. In a situation of danger, worry is not a detrimental negative thought. In this case, negative thinking is even a necessary precaution. Now, let's imagine that I'm getting ready to make a presentation in front of my team at the company, at my work. In this situation, the concern to fight or flight, to run away or to fight against people is not the most appropriate in that situation. So here the negative thinking is harmful. It is making me anxious, tense, and worried. I am unable to achieve a mindset of spontaneity, enthusiasm, and connection that is necessary to do a good professional presentation at my company. So what I'm trying to say is that having negative thoughts is not per se necessarily bad. Depending on the situation, negative thoughts can even help you. So what we need is to be able to change our way of thinking, depending on our goals, depending on our context. We want to know when to make a subjective change. It is important to know whether our standard way of thinking is being optimistic or pessimistic. It is very possible to change your standard mental model. At the beginning of our conversation, I said there are two ways to change our reality: objective change and subjective change. Objective change is wanting to objectively change everything around you: your body, your clothes, your house, your relationships, the material possessions you have, and so on. Now, the subjective change is changing your mindset, the way you interpret your reality. The main tip I want to share with you is that people often try too hard for the objective change, and they forget about the power of subjective change. We don't always need to seek change around us, outside of ourselves. The change that we need might be simply in the way we think. Stanford University has decided to research whether it is actually possible to change our mental model. After 1 decade of research and analyzing how people think, the researchers concluded that there are basically two types of mentality: the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. People with a fixed mind predominance believe that they have personality traits and abilities that cannot be modified. They don't believe they can change. They think they are stuck with a particular level of intelligence or skill with which they were born. Now, people with the growth mindset, they believe that virtually anything about themselves can be changed through effort and study and constant practice. They believe that they can change their thinking, and therefore they can have fewer negative thoughts. What we've learned from all of this is that it is very possible to change our standard mental model. It is perfectly possible to continuously improve. The easiest way to change your life for the better is to change yourself. Instead of seeking to change everything around you, seek to develop as a person. Try to have an optimistic, curious mentality, always in search of learning and continuous improvement. This is also a path that requires effort and discipline and persistence. But it is an easier path than wanting to change everything around you. When it comes to personal development, true learning is done through transformation. If you don't transform yourself, there is no learning. You might have memorized and understood a lot of things conceptually, but no true learning has happened unless there is transformation. Our mentality is formed through the narrative that we give to the facts and experiences that we live. And these facts, events, and experiences in themselves, they don't have an objective, universal meaning. Each one of us interprets the facts and events in a different way through our own narrative. Therefore, reaching understanding about your own narrative is the key step that needs to be taken in order to improve your mindset. Having negative thoughts is not necessarily harmful. What is harmful is when you become dominated by negative thoughts that trap you in a fixed mindset. The combination of negative thoughts and a fixed mindset can make it difficult for you to make important subjective changes. For a better life, we can replace the negative thoughts with a growth mentality and subjective changes. You want to know how to adopt this clever way of thinking and develop more as an individual? So you can take part in our special personal development course in which you'll learn how to achieve improvements in your own life, starting with yourself. And to do this, all you have to do is to go to arata.se/personal development.